Hi, I'm Scott Shearer. In this video, we're going to talk about Power Automate trigger conditions. A trigger condition allows you to specify conditions, and only when those conditions are met will your flow run. In other words, your flow only runs when you want it to run. In my demo, I'm going to use a SharePoint trigger, but trigger conditions are not limited just to SharePoint triggers. Let's take a look. Let's get started at looking at the documentation for trigger conditions. I'm actually looking at the documentation for triggers. If I scroll down, they talk a bit about adding conditions. Trigger conditions can help you streamline your flows and reduce the number of unnecessary runs. For example, you need to create a flow that processes every approved invoice. Without trigger conditions, your flow would trigger every time an invoice email is received, even if the invoice isn't approved. This can result in the flow running 1,000 times for 1,000 invoices, even though only 50 of them are approved. So that's the idea. You only want to run your flow when you need to run your flow. Now for the who cares part. This is especially important in pay-as-you-go environments where every flow run is charged. So if you're charged for every run, you want to run as few as possible. In addition, you might be up against some sort of throttling limit if you're very, very active. And finally, you just want to make your flows as efficient as possible. So let's go take a look at a flow that does not have a trigger condition, and then we'll add one. So I have a list called trigger filter, and when a new item is added to this list and the priority is critical, I would like to post a message to Teams. And I have a flow that works, that does exactly what it's supposed to. Let's go take a look. Here is my flow. I'm using a SharePoint when an item is created trigger. I then have a condition. Let's take a look at the condition. And the condition says when the priority value is equal to critical, then I want you to do something on the true side, and that something is post a message in a chat or channel. This flow works, but it works inefficiently because every time an item is created, this is going to run. What we want is to make it such that this only runs when an item is critical. Now, my assumption is a lot of you that have flows that look exactly like this and may want to add trigger conditions. So I'm going to show you kind of how to retrofit an existing flow with a trigger condition. If your flow is not overly complicated, this will probably work for you and make it so that you don't have to recreate your flow from scratch. First, let's take a look at where we would put the trigger condition. So I'm on my trigger. I'll go to settings. And right here, I would add a trigger condition. This has to be an expression, and this expression has to return true for the flow to run. Now, it could be a simple expression. It could be a very complicated expression, nested expressions. It doesn't matter. All that matters is whatever expression you have there has to evaluate to true for this to run. You can have ands and ors and nested expressions, etc. Once again, all that's important is whatever expression you put in there be valid and it evaluates to true. Secondly, I can add more than one trigger condition. And once again, it needs to be an expression, and that expression needs to evaluate to true. So if I've got more than one expression as a trigger condition, they both need to evaluate to true. Now, when I am adding a trigger condition, I prefer to do it a little differently to test my expression before I add it as a trigger condition. And to do so, I'm going to use a compose action. So let's add an action right here. I'll add a compose action. And one more thing, after my compose action, I'm going to add a control terminate action. Now this is optional but highly advised. Uh, and the reason I'm changing this to succeeded because I don't like to see things fail. This way, I can simply test my expression without having the rest of the flow run. I don't want to see a whole bunch of messages posted in Teams, or maybe I would be sending an email. I don't want all those emails going out. I just want to test my expression. So let's go do that. So I'm going to hit compose, and let's go enter my expression. And the cardinal rule is that this expression needs to evaluate to true or false, and a common way of doing that is to use an equals expression, which I have right here, and I want to see if the priority value, this is an option, so it's priority value, not priority, excuse me, there we go. And what do I want it to equal? I want it to equal, inside a single quotes, critic, C-R-I-T-I-C-A-L, critical. I'll click on add. So this essentially duplicates my condition. If we run this and the priority is critical, this compose action will return true. If not, it will return false. So let's save my flow and go test it. So I'll click on save. And once we save it, we'll test it by creating a new item. We want to test both something that's critical and one that's not. So my item is saved. We will now test it manually. I'll click on test. And now let's go create an item in my list. Add new item. Let's call this test 5. I'll have a priority of high, not critical. I will save it. My flow should kick off. Let's wait for it to finish and see how my expression evaluates. You can see my flow ran. Let's take a look at the compose action. Perfect, it evaluated to false. Let's try this one more time. Let's test it again. And this time we will create an item that is, which has the priority marked as critical. So let's go over, create a new item. Test 10 we'll call this, and make the priority critical. Save. Let's see what happens. My flow ran. Let's take a look at the compose action. You can see that it evaluated to true. Now I know I have an expression that works. Next step is for us to add that expression as a trigger condition and remove our condition in our flow. Let me start by editing my flow, going to the compose action, and let me copy the expression that I know works. I'll hit Control-C to copy. Now I'll go back up to my condition. I will go to Settings. I'll add a trigger condition. This is important to remember. I'm going to put an @ sign. And now I will paste in the condition. Excuse me, the expression. Remember, you need an @ sign before your expression. Now that we have that added, we can now remove our expression, our compose action, I should say. We can also remove our control terminate action. Now, what about our condition? I'm simply going to move the action under the true side, or on the true side, I should say, and move it up above the condition, because the flow is only going to run when that condition would have evaluated to true anyway. If you have, a handful of actions underneath, you can try moving them one by one. One trick you might use is to add a scope down in your condition. on the true side, add everything to the scope, and then drag the scope up there. But you can use this technique if your flow isn't that complicated, and I hope it works for you. Now that I have this up there, I can remove my condition. We now have a dramatically simplified flow that is only going to run in specified circumstances. That will reduce the number of runs, and that's good in a variety of ways. And you can hold your head high as a Power Automate developer because you have written a really efficient flow. If you enjoyed this video and you think it helped, please subscribe. I will be adding additional videos on a very regular basis.